In the 1800s, the oyster reefs of Chesapeake Bay could filter the entire volume of the bay in about 3 days. Today, the remaining oysters take over a year to do the same job. The water used to be clear enough to see the bottom in 6 feet. Now it looks like someone stirred a latte into it and walked away. The eastern oyster, Crassostrea virginica, is not glamorous. It looks like a rock that someone stepped on and then left outside for a century. It does not move. It does not chase prey. It sits on the bottom of an estuary, glued to other oysters or to whatever hard surface it landed on as a larva, and it opens its shell and lets the water come to it. It is, by most visual standards, the least interesting animal on this channel, except for the part where it changes sex. Most eastern oysters start life as male, and then as they get older, they switch to female. This is not unusual in the invertebrate world, but it does mean that a single oyster reef is technically a community of animals who have all lived as both genders and are frankly unbothered by the whole thing. They also have a 3-chambered heart, no brain, and can live for 20 years. They are, to put it gently, built different. Here's what one oyster does. It opens its shell. Water flows over its gills. The gills are coated in mucus, that traps algae, bacteria, sediment, and suspended particles. The oyster eats some of it. The rest gets bundled into little packets called pseudofeces, and deposited on the seafloor. One oyster doing this all day filters about 50 gallons of water. 50, that is a bathtub. Now, multiply that by millions. In the 1800s, the Chesapeake Bay contained roughly 625,000 acres of oyster reef, millions upon millions of individual oysters all doing the bathtub thing simultaneously. The result was a bay that functioned like a self-cleaning aquarium. The water was clear, the submerged grasses grew, the grasses held sediment, the sediment stayed put, the dissolved oxygen stayed high, the fish thrived, the crabs thrived, the watermen made a living. What the eastern oyster does is what ecologists call a regulating service. That is one of 4 categories of ecosystem services. Regulating services are the invisible maintenance work that ecosystems perform to keep conditions livable. Climate regulation, flood defense, water purification, pollination, pest control. If provisioning services are the stuff ecosystems hand you directly, regulating services are the stuff ecosystems are doing quietly in the background, so your civilization does not collapse while you're not looking. A single oyster filtering 50 gallons of water a day, pulling nitrogen and phosphorus out of the water column before they can feed an algal bloom that suffocates everything downstream. That is a regulating service. That is the plumbing nobody hired and nobody pays. Today, roughly 1% of those original 625,000 acres of oyster reef remain in Chesapeake Bay. 1%. The overharvesting started in the mid-1800s and never really stopped. Dredges scraped the reefs flat. The reefs are the substrate that new oysters attach to, so scraping the reefs did not just remove oysters, it removed the foundation that future oysters needed to exist. Then, in the 1950s and 1960s, 2 parasitic diseases arrived via international shipping ballast water. Dermo and MSX, they killed 90% of what was left. The bay lost its filter, and the consequences showed up on schedule. Nitrogen runoff from upstream farms, which the oysters had been quietly processing for centuries, began feeding massive algal blooms. The blooms died, decomposed, consumed the dissolved oxygen, and created hypoxic dead zones. Every summer now, large sections of the Chesapeake go hypoxic, fish leave, crabs leave, the submerged grasses that depended on clear water die back. The whole system degrades in a cascade that traces directly back to the loss of the filter. Here's the part that should make you genuinely angry. A 2012 study by the Army Corps of Engineers found that restoring oyster reefs removes nitrogen from the water at a lower cost per pound than building new wastewater treatment plants. The biological infrastructure is literally cheaper than the concrete alternative, and yet restoration funding has been a fraction of what wastewater treatment receives because oyster reefs do not have a lobbying budget and wastewater treatment plants have contractors who do. What I keep coming back to is the math. 3 days to a year, that is not a metaphor, that is a measurement. An entire estuary went from self-cleaning to functionally broken in the span of a few generations, and the reason was not complicated. We took the filter out, we scraped it off the bottom and shipped it to restaurants and never put it back, and now we are building concrete plants to do the job that a brainless, sex-changing, mucus-coated rock animal was doing for free. Thanks for watching. If you want to keep learning what the species around you are quietly doing for your civilization, subscribe. We will be back with another one.